My conversation with Angela was incredible, insightful, and inspiring. Angela is an international best-selling author, a certified Spanish education teacher with a master's degree in bilingual education. She's also the founder of PAX Ministry. She is a dedicated homeschool mother and a leader in the homeschool community. During our discussion, we touched on some sensitive topics. So, parents, I encourage you to listen first and decide if it's appropriate for your young children to listen later. Angela shares her remarkable journey to becoming fluent in Spanish and how her language skills have allowed her to build meaningful connections with the Hispanic community. I hope you enjoyed this powerful and uplifting episode. Be sure to stay until the end for our short Spanish lesson. Bienvenidos to the podcast for Bilingual Mindset. I am Karim Morato, your host and Spanish language coach. You are in the right place if you want company in your bilingual journey for your family or for yourself. Mi casa es tu casa. ¿Listos? 1, 2, 3. Aquí vamos. Hola, hola, Angela. ¿Cómo estás?
Bien, gracias. ¿Y tú?
Oh my goodness, I am so excited that you are here. I can't wait to have this conversation with you. And I want to tell my listeners that it was very funny the first time we met because I thought you were Latina. And we had this conversation in Spanish. I was in your podcast. And then I asked you, so tell me more about what country you're from. And then you say, what do you say to me? Do you remember?
I said, I'm a gringa con un corazón latino, con un corazón chapín.
Yes. And I could not believe it because for me, you were Latina. And your Spanish is amazing. So I'm going to start our conversation because I do think that I remember that when I met you, the first thing that really drew me to you was your heart. So I know that we're going to be talking a lot about Spanish learning because a lot of parents are listening to be like, okay, how did you become fluent? But I want to make that connection with the heart because you're not only fluent, and also you have traveled for all over Central America, right?
Yes.
And have you been in South America?
Not yet. It is on my bucket list.
It's in your bucket list. But it is just amazing. I could feel your heart, your passion, your compassion for the culture, and really your desire to connect. And I see how you connect because I introduced you to some friends, and they have become almost like your best friends. And it started with a WhatsApp introduction, and then the next thing I know, they are there where you live.
Yeah.
So I know my parents, students, you are going to have a treat because you are going to learn through our conversation that it's not just about the learning. It's not just about the grammar rules and the vocabulary and the methodology. And by the way, Angela, tell me a little bit about you before we start because I know you are a teacher, right?
Yes, I am a certified teacher. Well, actually, I don't know if we should kind of start at the beginning and then we can end up with how I ended up becoming a teacher. But I am a certified Spanish teacher. I'm certified in Spanish, ESOL, and special education. And I taught Spanish for a number of years. And it was so wonderful to get to share my passion and my love for the Spanish language and the Spanish culture with my students.
Wow, this is amazing. So we're going to be talking. And as we talk, you're going to be wearing different hats because there are going to be times where we're going to tap into your teaching hat, mom hat, and adventurous woman hat because I know you are very adventurous. So let's start by you taking us to this journey. How did your Spanish learning experience started in your life?
Yeah, so I first started learning Spanish at a very small private Christian school that I attended. I took a Spanish 1 class there, and my teacher actually did not know Spanish at all. And so it was very interesting. She was a Latin teacher, and they just kind of were like, oh, you teach Latin, you could probably teach Spanish. And she did not speak Spanish at all. So that was an interesting experience for me. I passed Spanish 1, but I really didn't know anything. And so after that first year in Spanish 1, that was in 8th grade when I took that class. And then after that, the summer before I started 9th grade, my church took a mission trip and they went to Guatemala for like a week. And so I signed up to go on this mission trip to Guatemala. I was like, this is going to be great. I'm going to be able to use my Spanish language skills and really put them into practice. And so I was really excited to go. But when I went there, I became really confronted with the fact that, yeah, I learned a lot about reading and writing. You know, I could read and write basic things, but I couldn't talk to anyone. I had no idea how to have a conversation. I was really afraid to speak, you know, because in school, you never get to practice actually speaking because, you know, there's 30 kids in the classroom and there's just no way that everyone can all be talking at the same time. And so it was very difficult. So I never actually got to practice speaking. And so when I came home from that trip, I felt very convicted about the fact that, you know, we traveled all that way. You know, we traveled so far to be able to go there with the intention of sharing with these people about the love of God and about, you know, the gospel and things like that. And we showed up there and we did a lot of really great things. You know, we brought toys for the kids. We got clothes for the homeless. We gave food to the families that were living in the basurero, which is the there. So we were able to give food to the families that were living in extreme poverty. We did a lot of really great things. But at the end of the day, that wasn't the goal. And I remember thinking, like, any atheist could do what I've been doing. Any atheist could go to this country and bring toys and shoes and clothes and food and give them out to people, and that would be great. But we come bringing more than just the material things. We come bringing the love of God. And so when I left that experience after a week and I said, I have to learn this language. I don't want anything to keep me from being able to share with people about the love of God. And so I came back and I did everything I could to learn Spanish. And so I signed up for Spanish 2 in my high school. And I did a lot of independent study. So outside of school, I would listen to music in Spanish. I would watch telenovelas in Spanish. I just tried to do everything I could to be immersed in the Hispanic culture close by me. I did a lot of things that probably looking back, maybe were not the safest. So like back in the this was, 20 years ago. So back in the day, they had Skype. I don't even know if people know what Skype is, but they had this technology thing called Skype, and it was basically like an instant messaging chatting service, and you could log on and you could chat with people from any country in the world, could chat with complete strangers. And so I would chat and I would go on there and I would look for other girls that were 13 years old like me and that lived in Guatemala because I'd been there, and I would just message them and ask them like, hey, I want to learn Spanish. Let's talk.
So you were 13 while you were doing all of these things to go outside the classroom and learn Spanish.
Yeah. Well, I was 12 when I went to Guatemala with my church. So I was 12 years old when I went to Guatemala, and then I turned 13 over that next school year when I was a freshman and started then.
So can you take us back to that trip where you landed in the airport and you went in? How was that experience, you going into a foreign country for the first time and visiting Guatemala? Can you talk to us a little bit about the cultural experience? What did you learn? What did you eat? What the places you went?
It was amazing. I mean, it was like an entirely different world. The streets looked different. The houses looked different. In the city, there were a lot of things that were similar, like they had McDonald's and they had Pizza Hut and some American stores. So that part was familiar. But because we were visiting an orphanage that was in una aldea, which is like a really small town.
Yes.
Yeah. So because we were visiting an orphanage that was in an aldea, then we were really able to immerse ourselves in what life is like for the majority of the people in third world countries, that they're living in extreme poverty. So I was able to see families that literally all they would eat would be tortillas. That was all they had. They would have tortillas and maybe frijoles. Sometimes they would have rice. But they were families that were living in extreme poverty with mud huts. A lot of them didn't have electricity. And so that experience for me was very eye-opening. To see the reality of the way that families are living. And I think one of the big things I learned too, we went to an orphanage, but the ironic thing was a lot of the kids that were there at the orphanage weren't actually orphans. A lot of them had parents, but their parents couldn't afford to feed them. And so they would give them up to this orphanage because they knew at least if they were at an orphanage, then the Americans would provide them with food. And
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
it was very,
I cannot imagine being 12. You're trying to process all of that.
yeah. Yeah, it was a lot. It was very intense for me, and it just really kind of put things in perspective for me. I came back from that trip and I just remember thinking, who am I to complain about the life that I have a roof over my head. I have parents who love me. I don't ever have to wonder where my next meal is coming from. I have clothes that fit me. I have shoes that fit me. You know, these poor kids, I mean, they had shirts that were full of holes that were 20 sizes too big, and shoes that were broken and ripped and torn that didn't even have bottoms on the bottom of the shoes. I mean, it just, everything about their life was so different from the life that I had experienced growing up. And I really felt the calling at that point to learn how to love these people the way that Jesus did, and to be able to be someone who is of service to people that are in need. And so that was kind of what that trip changed my whole life.
And I think you're right about that, because my husband and I, we had something that we told the kids well, first of all, we agree with each other. We say when the kids are 12, we're going to take them back to our country. So in this case, we decided Bolivia. And so we did that. And it was a complete mindset shift for my children, they were teens, when they went there and they witnessed the difference of lifestyle, the difference of, like you're saying, a lot of convenience around them. And they were like, they come back different. I'm going to tell you that. They really understood our background, right? Where Papi and I were coming from. Because it's different when you... I don't know if it's like that for everybody, but being first generation immigrant in this country, we see life very different. So it was interesting to take back our kids and say, okay, here, experience a little bit about our living, which, we have very good things. I'm not saying that everything in Guatemala is that dramatic, but you are speaking to a reality that exists, and we can avoid not talking about it. So I do appreciate you talking about this, because I was going to ask you what were some of your valuable lessons that you learned through that trip. But I think that you already said everything that you have learned. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I will. So actually, during that trip, one of the things, just kind of being really vulnerable and transparent with you, around that time, I, at 13 years old, I really struggled a lot with depression and suicide, and my mental health was not good. I switched from, my small private Christian school to this ginormous public school for high school, and just the whole, culture shock of making that switch. And I had also been through some pretty traumatic things around that season of my life that caused me to really struggle with depression. And it was so eye-opening for me to go on this trip and see these people that were living in such extreme poverty. And I just remember thinking, I'm sitting on this mountain in Guatemala, and I'm sitting next to this little girl whose hair looks like she hasn't been brushed in forever, and her shirt had holes in it. And she was just, sitting next to me and holding my hand, and we were counting the stars in Spanish and English together. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, how is it possible that I'm here with this little girl, and I'm struggling with depression, and I'm taking antidepressants and all this stuff to try to cope. And yet here this girl is who has absolutely nothing, and yet she's full of the joy of the Lord, and she was happy and smiling and running and playing and so free. And so it just, the dichotomy of the two was really shocking for me. And so actually on that trip, that was when I prayed and I asked God to heal me from depression. And I stopped taking my antidepressants at about halfway through that trip. And since then I've never taken an antidepressant again. I've never had a suicidal thought since that day. That trip literally changed my life and saved my life.
Wow.
Yeah, it really was a powerful experience for me.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, because, life is not just about academics. A lot of my students, a lot of parents are studying Spanish during these school years because they are so important, and they are taking this Spanish, I want to say subject, but it's not a subject. It's a life skill that we need, right? And it's so important, parents and students, and any learner, adult that is listening to this podcast, that sometimes we need to pause. Sometimes we need to check in and say, how are we doing mentally, spiritually,
Yeah.
and not just academically. So I so appreciate you addressing this. And so I can see how that spark inside of you the determination to become bilingual.
Mhm.
And so, what did your parents say? I'm curious because I would have loved my kids, being like, I want to be bilingual no matter what. I'm watching, all these Spanish channels and reading all these books. I mean, they did it because I was like, do it or what else? Like, you're gonna have consequence. But I love that you were a teen and you had that spark. What did your parents say about it? Because usually are the parents telling the kids, this is what we're gonna do.
Yeah, I think it really intrigued my parents a lot. Like neither of them, speak Spanish to this day, and I mean just a little bit that they've learned from being around me. But yeah, I think it really kind of surprised them. I'm sure they probably thought it was just like a passing phase, and they had no idea that I would completely teach myself how to be bilingual. But yeah, I think my mom was a little bit concerned because I was talking with strangers on the internet. So she would always tell me to be careful.
Yes, we don't recommend that. I want to clarify that, not on today's day.
Yeah, so I think that was really like concerning for my mom, that I was talking to strangers on the internet. But besides that, I think now they're really proud. They're so thankful because they hire a lot of people who are Spanish speakers, and so it really makes a difference when at least they're like, oh, my daughter speaks Spanish. It just helps people feel a little bit more welcome and appreciated that someone would take the time and put in the effort to learn their language and to learn their culture and to really be a part of their world in that sense. So yeah, I think they're really grateful now.
Now let's tap into the teacher hat right now,
Yeah.
because a lot of parents want to know strategies and specific learning strategies that you apply, not just as a student, but as a teacher. How did you help students learn Spanish? What methodologies, first of all, personally, you use, and then as a teacher, you help your students learn Spanish?
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in immersion. So my bachelor's degree, I actually have two bachelor's degrees. I have one bachelor's degree in Spanish. The second one is in teaching English as a second language. I have a minor in applied linguistics, and I have a master's in bilingual education. And of all the research that I've done from all my studies, they all are very, very clear that the best way to learn a language is through full immersion. So the more that you can give your children immersive experiences, the better. And I was very serious about that from my very first day as a teacher. I was teaching Spanish 1. Mind you, these are kids that don't know anything about Spanish. From the very first day, it was 100% in Spanish. Like I only spoke to my students in Spanish and that was it. But a big part of that on the first day was teaching them how to ask for help in Spanish. So that on our first day, that was one of the very first lessons we had. ¿Cómo se dice? How do you say this in Spanish? ¿Cómo se dice? Can you help me? ¿Cómo se dice? Where is my homework? ¿Cómo se dice? Whatever those things are. And so teaching them kind of those really key phrases so that they could advocate for themselves and ask for help in the language when they needed to was really, really helpful. And then I think sorry, go ahead.
Hold on. I like what you're saying because as you were talking, I imagine parents taking a sticky note. So I have a sticky note. So if you're watching my YouTube channel, you're seeing the video and you're putting como se dice in specific items like on the wall, on the window, on the sofa, on the chair. And in that way, you can be asking that question every day. So you can, and I want to clarify, some of my parents, they don't speak Spanish and they are taking this journey to educate bilingual children. So shout out to your parents that are doing that at home. So I love that idea. ¿Cómo se dice? Parents, can you say it? ¿Cómo se dice?
Yes.
Hola, are you a parent looking for guidance on helping your elementary age children learn Spanish? Make sure to sign up for my free parent webinar, How to Give Your Elementary Age Children an Authentic Spanish Learning Experience at Home, even when you do not speak the language. The link to register is on the show notes.
So that was the first thing. And then the second thing that I did as a Spanish teacher was I was very intentional to give my students opportunities to actually practice speaking Spanish through real life, real world situations. So we would do things like we would have a mock restaurant in our classroom, and they would cook food from, they actually cooked food from from a different Spanish speaking country, and they would bring it in. We'd do potlucks together. For the restaurant unit, we would actually go to a Spanish speaking restaurant locally. Like I would organize field trips to no, we're not just going to practice here. We're going there, I actually coordinated for when we were learning about music and things like that. I coordinated for one of my friends who's a Spanish speaker to come in and do a Zumba class live for the whole school. It was so much fun. We
Oh, wow.
was doing Zumba in the cafeteria, and they were learning bachata and salsa and all these other different types of they're such a part of the Spanish culture. Music and dance is huge for Latinos. And so, yeah, just trying to give them those immersive experiences as much as possible. And the ultimate immersive experience, I led a trip of my high school students, and I took them to Guatemala, and we spent our spring break serving the people in poverty, doing community service in Guatemala. And they said the same thing, that 1 week trip was life-changing for them. They learned so much Spanish because they were immersed in the language and the culture.
Now, I want my listeners to see, when I say at the beginning that you were adventurous, you are adventurous. I'm going to tell you that. I was a Spanish teacher for so many years, and I never had the chance to take my students to a trip. I was about to do it, but then COVID hit, and all the cancels, everything was canceled. But I love that, because parents, students, we can do that at home. We can create a mercado. We can create a restaurant experience at home, especially that I have a lot of parents that are homeschooling, a lot of students that are homeschooling. The sky is the limit, because we don't have regulations. We don't have a school schedule. All of these experiences we can create at home. I love it. I love it. Now, when it comes to lessons, and let's talk about grammar, vocabulary, what lessons that you can share with us out of those lessons that you until now you still use and you remember because they are so important and you apply it every time you speak Spanish? Can you think about those concepts, those lessons?
Like the grammatical lessons?
Could be grammatical and could be vocabulary. Yes.
I think, we all remember the vocabulary that is important for us when we need it. And that's going to be the case for your students. So the vocabulary that they need is going to be the vocabulary that they actually want to use. I know for a lot of students in high school, they're learning about things at a restaurant. That's like a very practical, useful thing that you can actually take and use and do that, But then there are other things that they would make them learn in school that I was like, they're never going to use. Like they would be talking about, I don't know.
Like, I got to tell you, right now we're finishing the Spanish 3 course with my team. And I added at the beginning, we had a lot of subjunctive lessons, and one of my teachers say, "Why are we teaching so much subjunctive? It's not like they're gonna use it every day." And we had a back and forward discussion about what grammar was important, because that's true. When you are teaching, you have to follow certain standards, right? That the state tells you, and you are thinking if some students want to go to college and you want to prepare them for some language placement test. But I think sometimes as teachers, and I have been guilty of this, we focus so much on the standards that we forget the practical part, right? We want to give them a lot. And what ended up happening when you're following a curriculum that you're just doing a lot of exercises and work without stopping to make sure that you're mastering those concepts, is like you forget the next day.
I think too, a lot of times it's very easy to put all of this focus and stress on having perfect grammar. And that was something I really excelled at. Like I was really great at the grammar part and the reading and writing and all of that. Like I can write. I write in Spanish better than a lot of my native Spanish speaking friends.
Can you go deeper on that? What makes you such a strong writer?
It was just like I think it's just my personality. I'm very like obsessive about having things be perfect and correct. And so it really mattered to me to have all the accents in the right place and all that kind of thing. It was just me. But I think part of learning a language is really getting that the purpose of the language is not to have perfect grammar, but to be able to communicate effectively with someone. So, and I would tell that to them. I would tell them that, you might say like, yo quiere comer pizza, right? Like, and you said quiere instead of quiero, but I understand what you were trying to say. I'm getting your communication. So if we can let go of this fear of not having perfect grammar and be okay with making mistakes and having the goal of being understood when we communicate, I think that will really help a lot of students to like let go of those fears of actually speaking and using the language. Because I think when we're learning Spanish as adults, we're very aware of the fact that we're making mistakes. And that self-conscious fear of like, oh gosh, I don't want to mess up. I don't want to say this wrong. I don't want to make a mistake. And it prevents us from being able to practice actually speaking with people, because we're like, oh gosh, if I say this wrong, it's going to be embarrassing. Well, who cares? Like, you can let go of feeling embarrassed and communicate the best that you can. And the more you practice communicating, you're going to get better and better and better.
I love what you say. The goal is making myself a goal of being understood. And, and that's so important when you are learning Spanish. And this is why it's not learning a lesson, not just learning a unit. It's a life journey. Because I bet even though you are fluent, hear you do TikToks in Spanish, you do whole presentations in Spanish. I'm very impressed by your level of fluency. But like you're saying, you're not worried. Did I say this perfect? You're communicating and you're connecting with thousands of Hispanics, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're not telling you, oh, you say something wrong. They never correct you, right? They love that you're trying to speak.
They do. I mean, sometimes even now, even though I've been, speaking Spanish and I'm a certified Spanish teacher, I still make mistakes sometimes. There are still words that I don't know how to say in Spanish, but there are words in English that I don't know how to say. So it doesn't bother me when I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know how to say this word, and there are some words that I've never had to say before. I remember a funny story. So one year I actually was doing translation. I started working as a translator as a teenager because I basically became fluent teaching myself Spanish, when I was 13, 14, 15. So by 15, I would say I was very fluent. And I actually went and did a translation for a medical team. They were doing medical missions in Honduras and Nicaragua. And I was translating for them. And the doctor was trying to tell me to tell the mother that her son had worms, like had parasites. And I was like, I have no idea how to say that word. Like, they did not teach me this in my high school Spanish class, how to say your child has worms in Spanish. And I was like, I have no clue. And so I had to ask one of my friends, and she was like, lombrices. And so I was like, okay, ever since then, I learned that word. I now know lombrices is worms, and it's but things like that. And I'm like, I had no reason to know that word prior to that moment where I'm like, I have to tell this parent that their kid has worms.
That's good. That's good. Well, listen, in one of my episodes, I told this story about when I came to this country in English. I was trying to apply for a job, and the kid told me, and they gave me like a test, like a testing day, right? And the kid told me, I want to go party. And I told him, no, it's not time to do party, because I thought party was fiesta. It's like, no, you can't go fiesta. And he peed himself in his pants. Oh my gosh. So yes, there are going to be those moments where we're going to make mistakes with the language.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I could tell you another funny story too. Just like some little things too, because every country also has, they all speak Spanish, but the Spanish is different in every country.
Yes.
And that's something I don't think a lot of people realize, is like the Spanish that you learn in school is not the Spanish that they speak in Mexico. And it's different than the Spanish that they speak in Guatemala versus the Spanish in Spain versus the Spanish in the Dominican Republic. Like, it's all totally different. And there are even times where there are two native Spanish speakers that can't understand each other because literally happened to you before that you're like, what are you talking about?
Can we all speak Spanish, please?
Yes. And I had that happen when I was in Guatemala. So funny story. They teach us in school that the word for car is coche. Like that's how they say coche is. They say
Yeah, well, and I know where you're going. This is why I tell my students in my Spanish course the car is carro because
yes,
I
thank
know.
you for
So
doing
keep
that.
going,
I
keep
was
going.
really embarrassed. So when I went to Guatemala, again, I'm a teenager, and to me, coche is carro, is a car.
Yes,
And so
yes.
I told all the kids at the orphanage, vamos en coche. And they all started laughing and they were going, and I was like, what is happening? And they were all cracking up at me. And I was like, why are you all laughing at me? And they were like, coche means pig. This whole time I've been telling them, let's go riding on the pigs, Yeah,
Oh yes, that is so true. But thank you so much for talking to us about this. And by the way, parents, I recorded an episode 7 is about accents and how to navigate that when you are learning Spanish. So make sure to listen to that podcast. But now let's talk about the challenges, because it seems to me, I could see that you're a very positive, you're a teacher. Nothing is an obstacle. We all can do this. But
yes.
Did you have any obstacles in this journey where you feel like, oh my goodness, this is too difficult, I want to give up, or I don't want to learn these? What was the challenge that you encountered while learning?
I think getting over this fear of speaking was very challenging for me. That part was really hard. I really wanted to learn how to actually speak. I felt very comfortable reading and writing because that was what I practiced. I was able to practice in school, was the reading and writing. But actually having a real conversation with someone was very difficult for me. And I think it kind of goes in levels. So there's speaking with someone when you can actually see their face. But then the next level of fluency, I think, is when you can speak to someone over the phone and you can't see their face. That is so hard when you're trying to learn another language, because when you're talking to someone on the phone and you can't see their face, you can't see their body language, you really have to know the language because you don't have all those other outside cues to help you. Whereas if I was in person with someone and they're like, ¿quieres la manzana o el banano? I can see the difference between the two things. But if they're just saying it over the phone, you're like, I don't know what you're trying to say.
That's true.
That for me was very challenging, getting comfortable to talk on the phone.
And I must say that listening is one of the hardest skills to acquire. So when you say that you listen to music, that you watch telenovelas, all of that was helping you in your listening skills.
Yeah. And I think that also helped me. The music in particular helped me with my accent. A lot of people have told me that for a gringa, that I have a very good accent, that, they hear me speak and they're like, oh, I didn't know, like your accent's so great. And I think that practicing speaking through singing was so helpful, because when we learn a language just by learning like word by word by word, we kind of speak, word by word by word. I want to go to the store. Whereas when we're actually saying it as a native speaker, we don't speak each word individually. We say, I want to go to the store, right? It all kind of flows together very differently. And it's that same idea in Spanish. And when you do that through songs, the words connect themselves so much better than when you're just trying to like learn word by word by word. So if you're wanting my special tip on how to improve your fluency, sing in Spanish. I think covers are awesome, because when you're singing a cover is basically like a song that they've translated into Spanish or English. So I would listen to like Hillsong's worship songs because I knew the song in English. And so then when I would listen to the cover in Spanish, I already had an idea of what the song was about. So that helped a lot. And I would just look up other like Spanish covers or Spanish versions of songs that I really enjoyed. And so that was how I learned that.
Yes, and we have all kind of music, especially now that Christmas is coming. We have all this Christmas music. We have them in Spanish too. So that's an excellent tip. So, Angela, can you talk to my teenagers? I have students right now studying Spanish 1, 2, and 3. And sometimes Spanish is hard for them. Or sometimes they don't want to do it because they are teens. They have so many other different things to do. So what message do you have for them to encourage them to keep going?
That's a great question. I feel like I'm kind of biased because I really love Spanish and I love the Spanish people. And I think that the more you can learning, like I said, learning a language just for the sake of learning a language is not useful, right? It doesn't matter if you learn a language, but you have no one to actually speak with and talk to. So I think if you can be really intentional to seek out friends and cultivate friendships with people that are native Spanish speakers or that only speak Spanish, that would be a huge, huge blessing and a motivator for you to actually practice the language, because no one wants to learn a language just to like do bookwork, right? We want to learn a language so that we can actually use it to talk to real people and do real things in our real life. And so, yeah, the more that you can get out in the world, start building relationships with native Spanish speakers, they're out there. If you don't have any local to you, there are other ways that you can build relationships with Spanish speakers. I don't know if you are familiar with ePals. That was something that we did as well. So I would highly recommend that, Karim, especially for you. So epals.com, it's an online website, pen pal website, where you basically partner with another school or a class in another country. And that was one of the things that we did. Every single one of my students, they were assigned a student that lived in Spain or Mexico or Guatemala, and they would write letters back and forth to each other. And it just really made the learning so much richer. And one time they would write in Spanish, but then the other time they would send a letter in English. And it was so great because they both got a chance to practice, feeling vulnerable of practicing a new language, but they also got a chance to be the expert too, where they were writing the letter in English and sharing their expertise with these other kids that were trying to learn English. And so doing things like that, I think is a huge blessing. Being able to really, exchange language in a way that's really powerful.
We're going to put that resource in the show notes. So that brings me to the next question. What kind of opportunities have been there for you, doors that have been open for you in your career because you speak Spanish?
Oh my gosh, so many. I think, well, chronologically, so I studied Spanish in high school up until Spanish 4. That was the highest that I did, actually, like studying it in school. And after that, because I had done so much independent study outside of school, I decided that year that I wanted to try to take the Spanish AP exam. And for those of you that don't know, AP Spanish is usually taken after Spanish 5 or Spanish 6. So yes. I did not, and they have a whole class that they teach, you have to take the class before you take the test. At least that was what I thought. And so I just asked them, I said, hey, can I just try and take the AP test? I never took the AP class. I just said, I'm just going to try my best and see how I do. I took the AP test, and out of a score of 5 being the highest score, I got a 5.
Wow.
And,
yeah. An AP test is so difficult.
Yeah.
I think I could even fail the test. Because the test, I feel, is kind of created to make sure they know what you don't know.
Yeah. So and I say that to say, so I took the AP test for Spanish. I passed that. I got a 5. I also, when I went to college, I took the CLEP exam for Spanish.
For that one too.
Yeah, the CLEP test. So I took the CLEP test. I passed the CLEP test also. And because I tested so high on the CLEP test and I passed that, they gave me 12 college credits for that one test.
Yes.
12.
Wow.
Okay. And for those of you who don't understand the context of that, if I were to take an AP English class and pass it, I would get 3 credits. If I were to take an AP Calculus class and pass it, I would get 3 credits. If I were to take an AP Chemistry class and pass it, I would get 3 credits. Spanish is the only test that if you take it and pass it, you can earn 12 college credits with one 90-minute test. That's huge.
Yes,
that's huge.
I remember doing that.
Yeah. And so, for me, I was attending a private Christian college. And so 12 credits was the equivalent. That was an entire semester of college that I was done with. And so because of that, I was able to not only earn those credits, but I was able to finish 2 bachelor's degrees in 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So think about the thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars that I saved because I taught myself Spanish independently, because I took a test and just to see how I would do, and I passed. And all the money that I saved, missing out on a 1.5 years worth of university because I got 2 bachelor's degrees in 2.5 years instead of 4 years for one degree because of Spanish.
Wow. Now let's talk about your work life.
Yeah. So work life, when I first started my career, actually my senior year of high school, I actually got a job as a translator at our local hospital. And so that was what I was doing. I was the translator. I was the interpreter. Sorry, the interpreter. Translation is written, and interpreting is spoken language. So I was the interpreter for the labor and delivery department at our local hospital. Can you
Wow.
talk about some crazy experiences, right? Not only like I'm like 16 years old and I'm in the hospital working with the ladies with their legs up and the baby's coming out. Oh, funny story about that too. So again, things that they don't teach you in school. The first time that they had me translating in labor and delivery, they didn't have anyone on the floor who spoke Spanish. They called me to come into this room. This poor woman was having difficulty giving birth. She was screaming like crazy. The doctor was like, tell her to push. And I was like, oh my gosh, they did not teach me this in my Spanish class. I'm like, I don't know how to say push. I don't know how to say push. I was 16 years old and I'm like, what do I say to this lady? So I literally yelled at the nurse. I was like, go find a door and read to me whatever's on the door. Like, go find a door. And so she came back and she was like, Empuja, Empuja. And I was like, oh my gosh, no. But yeah, so then I was like, no, it's empuja, not empuja. But I got it. And again, one of those words I will never forget because I needed it.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This is so good.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
They had told me that because I was an interpreter for the hospital, they said that because I was an employee of the hospital, they would have paid for me to go become a registered nurse. They would have paid for my medical school if I wanted to continue on and become a nurse or a doctor. And I ended up, changing my mind. Of course, I ended up becoming a Spanish teacher instead. But just so you know that is an option that's out there for you, that if you are able to communicate another language and you have an interest in the medical field, you can get a job as an interpreter and then use that where the hospital will pay for you to go to college.
Wow.
So lots of opportunity.
That's amazing. But then you become a Spanish teacher. So you obviously that became your career.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, I don't think I have a lot of people here that they want to become Spanish teachers, but they do want to speak. And I also want to mention that you are a writer and your books are also, you translated your books into Spanish, right?
Yes. Yeah. I published a book when I left teaching. And so I published a book called Tales of a Toxic Teacher, Exposing the Cycles of Abuse Within Our Schools. And I translated that book into Spanish. And then I've translated a couple other books into Spanish as well. But yeah, I'm
and now you also have a community, and in your community, it's a Hispanic community, right?
We're both, but yes, I do
both.
have a community that is specifically for Hispanics that are wanting to learn about homeschooling and especially unschooling, which is the type of homeschooling that we do, and unschooling and world schooling. And so we really specialize in those two things. And there's just, there aren't a lot of resources available about homeschooling or unschooling in Spanish. And so I'm on a mission to change that and to help really empower the Latino community to learn at home.
Can you tell me more about how Peaceful World Schoolers was founded?
Yes. So Peaceful World Schoolers, that's my my TikTok handle, my Instagram handles. If you look for me on social media, you can look up Peaceful World Schooler. I came up with that term because I kind of hate the term unschooling. Unschooling, for those of you who don't know, unschooling is self-directed education. And I'm really not a fan of the term. I really wanted to think of a term that embodied what I was standing for and what I was committed to rather than what I was against, school. And so I came up with the term peaceful world schooling because first and foremost, I believe that God has called us to cultivate peace on this earth, and that peace begins with me. We can't experience peace in the world if I'm not experiencing peace first and foremost with God, within myself, and then within my home, and then sharing that peace with the rest of the world. So peace is having a peaceful home and a peaceful life is something that's very important to me. And then the second part, being a world schooler, I really wanted to embrace the fact that the entire world is our classroom and all of the people and places in it are our teachers, and we're not limited to learning within, the confines of a classroom. And there's so much that we can learn by actually experiencing the real world. And so that's how the term Peaceful World Schoolers came to be.
Now, for my parents and listeners who want to connect with you, how can they connect with you?
So a couple different options. So obviously you can follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. I live in Maryland. So if you live local here in Maryland, we actually have a Facebook group called Peaceful World Schoolers of the DMV. So we do field trips and events all over Maryland every single week. So there's tons of awesome activities going on here. And then of course, if you're interested in any of my books, I can send you a link for those, Karim. So you're welcome to share those. I've published over 20 books. Lots of really good stuff for you to read. And then I'm also the founder of PAX Academy, which is a private school for unschoolers. So if you are interested or needing help or support or curious about how your kids can live and learn without school as self-directed learners or peaceful world schoolers, then you can definitely check out PAX Academy.
Perfect. Now, let's do our Spanish lesson time. This is the time where we teach our audience something in Spanish that was helpful to you. And we were thinking about it, right? We were talking about what would be so useful. And I say to you, hey, why we don't share something that our listeners can use if they visit a new country and they want to gain the trust of the locals?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start that. What expressions, what phrases, what words are very essential if we are first and new to the country and I want to gain trust and I want to be helpful? What teach us something?
So before any words or phrases, I think the most important thing for us to do when we're in a new country and we're wanting to interact with new people is all of the nonverbal stuff, right? So when you are in a new country, the first thing that you can do to establish trust with someone is simply smile.
Sonreír.
Yeah, sonreír. If you have a positive presence about you, if you can smile, that is one easy way to just kind of break the ice and immediately build trust with the people that you're interacting with. And then after that, of course, comes, the actual language piece. So we were talking about some different languages or phrases. I think one that is very important is asking for help, being able to ask someone, ¿me puede ayudar? Me puede ayudar. Can you help me?
Me puede ayudar. Make sure you are repeating with us. Me puede ayudar.
Yes, me puede ayudar. So, me puede ayudar. Can you help me? Is a really important question. And then asking some other things like we talked about earlier. ¿Cómo se dice? How do you say this in Spanish? I'm trying to think of another one. Oh, ¿dónde está? That was another one. Yeah, ¿dónde está?
So the question. So listen very well. She's saying, ¿dónde está? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how would you apply that question? ¿Dónde? Which is where is it, right?
Yes.
How would you
means where is it? So if obviously the basic one, ¿dónde está el baño? That's kind of that's an important one. You got to know how to ask. If you're in another country, you need to know where is the bathroom. ¿Dónde está el baño? There are some other questions that you can ask as well. ¿Dónde está el bus? Where's the bus? ¿Dónde está el restaurante? Where's the restaurant?
Muy importante. ¿Dónde está el restaurante más delicioso?
Eso, ¿dónde están los tacos? That's what I want to know. ¿Dónde están los tacos? And if you notice there, I said, ¿dónde están los tacos? Right? Because we're asking where something is. So our verb also has to be conjugated too. So, ¿dónde están los tacos? Or ¿dónde está el burrito más grande?
Los tacos al pastor.
Yes.
And also, and I love that you also added the expression, the sentence, quiero aprender español.
Yes. Yeah, that's another one. Quiero aprender español. When you can tell people that you have a desire to learn their language, they're going to be very inclined to want to help you. And actually, this is one of the things that I did when I was learning. When I would talk to people on Skype, I would tell them that. I would say, quiero aprender español. ¿Me puede ayudar? And I would ask them, can you help me? And we would do un intercambio, an exchange. So one day we would have, Monday was all Spanish. Only Spanish, no English. Tuesday would be our English day. All English from both of us. Then the next day, I would speak in Spanish and they would speak in English. And then on Thursday, I would speak in English and they would speak in Spanish. And then on Friday, it was just kind of like a free-for-all. And that was how we organized our week.
Wow, so creative.
Yeah, yeah. And it was great. So depending on whatever the day of the week it was, we all got to have the opportunity to both be the learner and to be the expert at the same time.
Excellent. And I love that because I bet parents and students that if you find someone that is looking to learn English and they
I know
and they
many.
speak Spanish, you know many.
I
Yes.
know many. Yes.
So you all can connect with Angela and ask, how can we exchange the value so we both can win and learn together? I love that.
We have a lot of, I would say, probably like 75% of the students that are enrolled with PAX Academy are native Spanish speakers, and they're desperately looking for opportunities for their kids to interact with native English speakers so that they can have a language exchange. And so, yeah, I would love to, talk with you more, Karim. Maybe we can set something up with your students so we could do maybe our own little pen pal thing, so that way they can have that opportunity to really interact with and with real speakers of the language.
That would be excellent. Well, Angela, I enjoy so much talking to you. Thank you so much for coming and talk to my community. And I so appreciate your heart, your love for our community. And I can't wait for my audience to connect with yours. And also I have to say you have a podcast too.
Yes, I have a podcast in English and Spanish. So if you are an English speaker, it's the Peaceful World Schooling podcast. And if you're a Spanish speaker, my podcast is Descubriendo Desescolarización. Karim was one of my very first guests on the podcast. And so I'll share the link so that way you can share the link to your episode so you can hear Karim and my conversation in Spanish. It'll be a great opportunity for you to practice and learn.
All right. So I wish you the best and hug to the kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Adios. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found value and encouragement in this episode. It will mean the world to me to know how this podcast is impacting you. Por favor, please take a few minutes to let me know and leave a review. When you leave a 5-star review, it will help others discover the podcast. Do not forget to subscribe. See you soon. Hasta luego.